Branching over to the semiotic, because you're asking the questions, or what are the symbols saying? How do these symbols and signs have, what are the meanings that they have and that they generate? Anna, what do you?
Going back to what Joe said, I thought of the Olympics that are coming up in 2008 that are going to be in Beijing. That this would be a good way to try to motivate people to go.
Okay, so maybe rhetorically, so you're paying attention to the time of the communication. And rhetoricians pay attention to the time question of, well, how is this connected to other events taking place within the culture? So right, this coming out now perhaps connects with the Olympic interest in China.
Also, rhetorically, it's meeting arguments in a sense. Again, to go back to, you know, we're not a third world or second world. We're prime time. You know, if your argument is we're not ready to join, yes, in fact, we are, and you know, other arguments that typically come up when we think about China are, you know, it's sort of out of control in terms of the mechanization, but they showed a very clean, neat, orderly building of things that was juxtaposed with nature. You know, so it seemed to be meeting at least my personal arguments. You know, when I worry about, you know, what would I be concerned about if I went there. Okay,
so this could rhetorically be promote from the Chinese perspective, a promotion of a certain image. It could be intended to create that image. So a phenomenologist asks questions about experience. A rhetorician asks questions of composition and audience and action. How does this fit into time and to what we're thinking about doing? Let's see if there's any socio-psychological. Would a socio-psychological perspective help us at all with this? I don't think it's a major one. I can see one point where socio-psychological would maybe be relevant.
Around faith, maybe?
How?
Well, that, you know, again, I mean, I'm making assumptions aimed kind of at, because we're in the United States, but, you know, this is a country of faith, and they seem to be keen on showing, you know, the monks sort of in a spectacular kind of parade of faith.
So in that sense, it would be that these are people like us.
Right, and they're that if it's interaction between you know, individuals, you know, faith is a very personal matter, and they're saying yes, we have it too.
Okay. Yeah, so it's a hard one. Socio-psychological. This is not really a socio-psychological artifact. The only thing I thought of in that sense was the question of the rapid scene changes and people's cognitive processing of information. You know, I think a cognitive person might be interested in the question of how long is attention span, how do we maintain attention over 4 minutes and 10 seconds, how many different scenes can we show, what's too fast, what's too slow.
Where would it seemed that the parts that were nature or man-built phenomenons like the Great Wall of China, like they were left up longer than the ones that were of labor. That
could be. So that has a little psychological edge to it in terms of time of processing. Okay. But it also has a semiotic question of proportion. So we'll hit that.
In that case, would music also be considered?
Yeah, it could be. So that, yeah, nice thought. That from a socio-psychological perspective, music, it goes along like a radio wave carries information. The music carries the images into our minds, maybe. Yeah. So there's a cognitive processing dimension. Nice thought. All right, so then we have a sociocultural perspective. So the sociocultural analysis would ask questions of how are we creating our social reality together. So again, it's not just looking for cultural things in it, but a sociocultural perspective says that people use communication to produce and reproduce social structures. That they create a social world through their beliefs, attitudes, and values that are repeated and passed back and forth. So how does this function socioculturally?
I thought it did that when it showed the scenes of the different times of showing people at their job working. Like the farmers there, the people in the manufacturing, it looked like electronic products. The men working on the bridges, and they were welding.
Okay, so these reinforce cultural images that we have. So it's both reinforcing and creating adaptation in us. It's showing us it's familiar and new. Did you have a thought?
Yes, I was thinking of the same thing, but more like reinforcing an identity that would be unique and in contrast with something that you might, for example, find in the Western world. So we've only seen, it's only emphasized things that are traditional and unique for China.
Okay.
So that would constitute a point of attraction for foreigners.
An identity. So how is identity constructed socially and culturally, right? So we'd ask the questions about the cultural, the communicative creation of an identity.
I was just one of the other things is like you'll see the individual, you see him, he's one person, but then it goes to like how like we're individualistic and I understand like it always goes to multiple people like doing the same thing, like more like a group atmosphere, like inclusion.
Yeah. Yeah, there are very powerful images in the beginning here of the groups of people. Not going to cooperate anymore. Yeah, and this will lead us kind of into our semiotic. There you go. Yeah. So
I feel like if it was an American thing, like a lot of times when we see stuff in our country, it's like you'll have maybe a white person, an Asian person, or a black person to show the diversity, but here they're kind of like focusing a lot of the stuff. While you do have different images of different people and different jobs, there are also like all the you have all these people here. You have like one guy with a lantern, but then it zooms out or it changes to a different thing, and you have like 10 people with a lantern instead of the individual.
Okay.
Different.
So culturally, it reinforces our views of collectivist cultures versus individualist cultures.
To expand on that point, actually, I think it shows the different types of jobs within the culture, but within the certain jobs, it all looks uniform. They're all wearing the same clothes within that certain working culture. And same goes in the factory when they all have their hair up and they're all wearing the same blue suits and working on. And same thing with the farmers, they're a distinctive group of workers, but they're all wearing the same thing. So it's like we're individualists, but we're also one person.
Which is kind of, again, moving over into semiotic. So let's ask ourselves, let's just check ourselves. So we've done phenomenological, which was experience. We've done rhetorical, which is audience adaptation for action, effect. We've done socio-psychological, we've done socio-cultural. That's 4. I want to say semiotic and critical. What did I miss? Cybernetic. Okay, so what would we be asking ourselves if we were thinking in a cybernetic mode, which asks about interacting parts, networks of flow of information being communicated? I'm not sure that this is a strong cybernetic. I'm not coming up with anything quickly. From a system, I mean, you can see within it systems, but I'm not sure the thing itself.
With the system, like, if we were looking for systems, would it be like us and this piece?
Yes.
And the system that it has, so like,
And how is it distributed? Who has access to it? Where does it go from here? You're looking at
maybe the
flow.
fact that, like, in order to see this, you would have to have a computer. So it's like people who are living in poverty, in the city someplace wouldn't have access
Right.
to the
How does the flow bypass? What are the nodes of communication? What are the what's isolates? Who are the isolates in the network? Right. That would be a cybernetic approach to this communication. And actually, cybernetics has its roots in communications technology. So that would be interested in the question of the technologies, to some extent, by which this was accessible to us, and the flow of bits, that come.
Would you have to look at the producer of it, considering that, like, they usually say BBC is a more neutral channel, they don't really take more sides, more like as if like Americans are conservative or
Okay.
liberal, and where they're very neutral, so they kind of give an overview of where someone else might pick a
Do a
more
different
targeted
documentary. Yeah.
area to.
So in a sense, what you're pointing to is what network of producers is this part of? And how does that producer relate to other producers? So, right, and what divisions within BBC are there? So that would be cybernetic kind of questions. But now, the last two are the most rich, I think, for this, is the critical and the semiotic perspectives on this. So the critical perspective would ask, who produced it, in whose interests, whose voices are heard, whose voices are not heard, who are the people who benefit by it, were the people who were used in its production included in the rewards of this, or were they abused in that they were taken and provided labor but were not reimbursed for their labor. So the critical perspective asks questions about production and asks questions of who is served, whose interests are served by this, and whose interests are not served. What is the power relationships evident in this artifact? All right, so let's get at that a little bit. Anyone want to make some observations or comments about the critical perspectives of power, labor, money, voices, marginalized, oppressed?
In general, it's being sold as a vibrant culture that has elements of celebration, it has elements of natural beauty, it has elements of industrial capacity and know-how, it has healthy looking people,
Right.
It has
Happy boy bubble,
right.
right?
It's a complete culture, and it's difficult. We were talking about the Olympics. I mean, that was really the first thing that popped into my head was it's really ramping up.
So what is not shown is this the reality of China?
From a certain point of view, it is.
Okay.
And where you are in the social ladder might be, but in general, it shows a positive side of China. It doesn't show the negative that most people focus on.
Right. So from a critical perspective, what you're not seeing is the child labor. You're not seeing the unsanitary work conditions, the lead-based paint problem. You're not seeing the rural area where there is avian flu in people because they hang out with dirt, so close to animals and nature and dirt all the time. So you're not seeing that.
A really big thing is you're not seeing the, plummeting number of women compared to men, because it's inconvenient.
Okay, yeah, I'm not even tuned in on that. So you're not seeing a gender issue of babies being preferred in infanticide, are we talking?
Yeah.
Female infanticide.
I was just gonna say, even if you were to say, okay, it's, meant for tourists, so we're not gonna show all the other stuff to tourists when it comes to this, you still don't have stuff like traffic, even though, you're not gonna sit there and watch a parade every day. You're gonna go and you're gonna see the nice parts of it, but you're still gonna have, just general, issues that the country has that you can't escape from, even if you don't go to those parts.
Okay. So you're not seeing some of the inconveniences, and you're not also seeing the whole military dimension. The whole military dimension is absent from this. So from a critical perspective, who benefits from that, leaving that out?
So even the parts you are seeing, they're kind of glorifying they're working in the field. I mean, it looks great. So some people working there, it looks like they're having a great time. But they're not showing the hours of sweat work. It's not like something you'd actually want to go. I mean, it needs to be done, but no one goes to visit someone working in the field.
Right.
With the music and everything, it looks fantastic.
Plus, how often do they really wear these outfits? You know what I mean? Like the outfits and stuff are more traditional outfits, and they show it so much. But in reality, people aren't walking.
No,
Walking around.
Okay.
That's the way we are.
So this is what critical theory does. Critical theory looks at it as a product of a particular interest and asks whose interests are served by this, who produced it, why did they get to produce it instead of someone else getting to produce it? Who doesn't get access to media production? Who does have access to media production? Who gets left out? How are there unjust social arrangements that are perpetuated by this communication? Who does it serve? Who doesn't it serve? Who got money? Who gets money out of this? Follow the money trail. I mean, all these cinematographers who took this were paid to do it. Someone paid for the equipment. Someone paid for the film to be processed, or the digital images to be transmitted and stored. Who pays for all that?
I wouldn't even be surprised if the military had his hands in it, considering that they're not even involved to try to show that, we're not really as bad as it seems. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, who knows?
Those are questions that critical researchers ask about communication. So they would research it, and they would tell you, here's how much it cost, here's where the money came from, these kinds of things.
I was kind of going along that line. There was only one picture, I think, and it was the president of China, or whoever, I don't know what their ruler is, how it's defined. But there was one scene, and there's really not much going on. There's there's a picture of
Soldier
the
standing
center.
guard, yeah.
And it's shown very, very brief.
Right.
I think that's the person who's
Yeah, it's true, and when it came up, I didn't know what to do with it in my head.
Yeah, it's completely different than everything else that they're showing, but it's a split second of, this is who's in charge next.
Right. In fact, there was a military, a soldier standing by the picture of Mao Zedong. Right. Yeah. Yeah, so you have the old and the new. I mean, the cinematographers, pay attention to these things. But a critical theorist asks the questions of, and if BBC makes money off of this by selling it to Apple to post as a HD TV ad, then to some extent it's in the service of production of HD TVs, which are sometimes made in China, the LCD screens, and that then you're going to want to buy one of their things to watch this image of them, which is kind of a really postmodern ironic thing, because you want to watch it in HD TV. So there's all questions of production. Right, who can watch an HD TV broadcast? Who can't? So a critical theorist asks a lot of questions about production. and whose images are in it, whose images are not in it, that kind of thing. Wow, I'm exhausted. We haven't even gotten to semiotic yet, which is the richest one for this. Before we hit semiotic, any comments or questions? Or
Just, you know, I mean, it's like, so we was talking about the farming, I think every country does that thing with the image of the farming, you know, I know the French did it when I was there, like, all French presidents have to go and kind of pat a bull on the ass and go, oh, nice bull, like, you know what they're talking about. And it's the same thing here in the United States, you know, and it's, I guess it's kind of a constant, you know, this idea of, you know, it's not, I guess I just meant it's not unique to China that they would produce something like
Right.
this. We do it best.
Yeah. But I hope you're getting a feel for the way you can shift lenses. You shift theoretical lenses and you ask different questions, and it reveals different things. Some lenses are more productive than others on given artifacts, but in this case, the semiotic is the most prolific of stuff. So, what does a semiotician look for? Signs, symbols, meanings. How do we use symbols to communicate meanings? How do those symbols come to have meanings? How do we know what they mean? How do we interpret those symbols? So,
Also, like in video, like how things are shot, like what perspective, like from here,
Right.
you're on the ground, and while you're not looking completely up, it's not like you're looking straight up at it, like the way
Right.
it's framed, it's not straight on. It's
So semioticians would look at this and they would ask questions, well, why this angle instead of that angle? So they use what I call the commutative property. I don't know what other people want to call it, but where you constantly switch things. And you say, well, how would this image be different if I shot it from above? How would this image be different if I shot it from over on that corner? How would, because the way it is shot gives it meaning, and if I could change something and it doesn't change the meaning, then that doesn't have meaning. But if I change it and it changes the meaning, then that thing had meaning.
I think what stood out the most, at least to me, was especially when the subway came up and it was so clean. I mean, it
Okay.
was just like, wow, everything that they shot is just very clean, crisp, and there's no real dirt in the lens, if you know what I mean? And that might
Okay.
have to do with the upcoming Olympics, considering, you know, it's clean, it's safe, it's okay to come here, and it's not this hole in the lens somewhere.
So the semiotician would say, okay, the symbolically then, the clean, the concept of clean is being symbolized in this. And it's being symbolized through subway, it's being symbolized through, you know, and we look for the signs that are communicating clean.
You don't see one bit of trash on the street right there, I mean, come on.
Yeah, well, and it may be true. They may take more civic responsibility, you know, and people clean up their area, police their areas. Now, some of the images, I think, are just striking images, You know, they have a certain spectacle. They're something we like to see and watch. So they have a spectacular feel to it. This is pretty interesting because it just goes right off this huge cliff. A critical theorist would ask, you know, how are these men secured, and are they at risk physically for the benefit of somebody else? That's what a critical theorist would ask at this point.
Can you say also the colors? Like if you look at the
Colors.
red on his hat compared to like one of the traditional, like where they're when in mass or doing something like that, the colors of the of, you know, like the old Chinese, like out of a Chinese restaurant, like what you would expect, compared to the pictures
Okay.
of the modern China.
Right.
The older ones are much brighter, more vibrant.
Right, so what do the colors mean? What do different colors mean? Right, and in red and yellow, are the colors of the flag, the Chinese flag. So when you see ads for spaghetti in magazines, there's always 3 colors, right? So that's a semiotic meaning. It has meaning. If you saw a spaghetti ad in red and yellow,
Red and yellow.
you'd be like,
They make you hungry.
Is that right?
That's why like Wendy's and McDonald's, they all use it's proven. Like,
okay.
I'm not making it up, I swear it's true.
So colors, a semiotician would ask about the flow of images. So would ask what came first, what came second, what came third. If I change the order, would it change the meaning? Now you picked up the day metaphor, morning. Also, if you notice, the opening is an opening. It opens with an opening door. So a semiotician would love to talk about the meaning of that. What does it open into? And what images do you see as it opens? So a semiotician would want to take this apart, almost scene by cut, and would get the times of each cut, would categorize the cuts according to meanings, would compare issues of arrangement, timings, would ask the question of the music track, and would describe the music track according to the images. So a semiotician would want to touch base with the symbols. What does this mean, to us? And what does the spectacle of it mean? The Roland Barthes was often writing about spectacle. Who's read Barthes? Read Barthes. What do you get out of spectacle? Because he would write about circuses and wrestling matches and all these.
I don't think I've read that.
The mythologies.
Yes.
Yes.
More, I don't know exactly. He wrote something about mirrors as well.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we'll let that go at this point. But Roland Barthes would go to wrestling matches, and he would do semiotic analysis of the wrestlers, WWF kind of thing. What are the images, what are the meanings, and what is the flow of the good and the evil, and the costumes, what do the costumes mean? He was French, so he was in France doing all of this. If he was in Mexico, he would have been with the Mexican wrestlers with all their costumes, and all that stuff. So a semiotician looks at the questions of the flow and what each symbol means, the colors, the arrangement. So yeah.
I'm just trying to make a connection. During the undergrad, are you familiar with the iMovies that Dr. Bond makes the undergrads do? This is what it seems like to me when he told us to, we have to pick an editorial if we want to do informational or just for fun, and then pick a song and the images that have to create to that feeling.
Yeah.
So is this basically what they're doing, but from the opposite perspective, they're analyzing it?
Well, semiotician, right. The author composes.
Right.
The semiotician
Is the one that's analyzing.
Analyzes the composition.
Okay.
Yeah, and like any artifact, the problem becomes that the meaning of the artifact is removed from the author.
Is it always what the author wants it to be?
Well, it depends what your literary theory is. If you're a certain kind of literary theorist, you respect the intentionality of the author, and you do analysis. For instance, we might, if we were that kind of a literary or a hermeneutic interpreter, we would want to interview the producers, and we would ask them, what were you thinking? Why did you do this? What was in your mind when you did this? And we would care about what they thought when they produced it. If we're another kind of author, literary theorist, we could care less what they had in their minds. What matters is the reader response. What matters is the meaning that it creates in the reader or the viewer.
I was thinking of a couple of examples in rock and roll. The one that jumped in my mind was when Bruce Springsteen wrote Born in the USA, and immediately, it was 1984, the Republicans jumped on. Actually, both parties
Right.
wanted to use it as a theme song for their conventions, and he was saying, have you read the lyrics? Do you understand it at all? And it didn't matter.
Right.
It didn't matter what the lyrics were.
Right. And it didn't matter what he intended it to
Right.
mean.
And in fact, it goes on not mattering in a way.
Right.
That's not the way people receive it.
So Stan